what I was saying, that your salt, whatever salt that might be present in your crude oil, it might be magnesium chloride, it might be sodium chloride, so that basically dissolves in water. So if you get rid of the water from your crude oil, so that means you are also getting rid of the salt, because salt doesn't dissolve in oil. So in that way, you would be free from. Yeah. So what I was saying, that since your salt, not only it can corrode your whatever equipments that you are using, but it also can act as a catalyst poison. So you can see salts acts as a catalyst poison, both in case of your reforming unit as well in case of your isomer, like catalytic cracking unit. So like removal of water and salt are pretty much important, and I would also explain at a later stage why only, like if you even remove all the salt without removing the water, so what are the problems it might happen at a later stage while processing. So those problems I'll be discussing at a later stage. So let me just go through the slides. So most produced water contains salt, so that can cause problems in the production as well as refining. Solid precipitates form scale on the process equipment. So if it like fouls your heat exchanger, so that means heat exchanger efficiency is going to go down. So like it is going to reduce the heat transfer coefficient value, and obviously that you don't want. So that's why other than your corrosion, plugging, fouling are other effects of your salt deposition. So salts can also accelerate corrosion in piping and equipment, and since even this corrosion is further aggravated because we are dealing with severely high temperature. At high temperature, your corrosion process actually aggravates even further. So like desalting operations, so that is why it is so important. Sometimes the produced oil contains crystalline salt, which forms because of presence of your pressure and temperature changes, cause of because of stripping of water vapor as fluid flows up the well bore through the production well. So like they are saying that since during your oil production, your oil can also contain crystalline salt, but it also can happen that some of the minerals can also, because of this rapid pressure change whenever you are digging out the oil from the well bore, so those at that time also some additional salts can get mixed up with your crude oil, so that is why you need to get rid of it. So in terms of like fouling and corrosion consideration, just a moment. Yeah. So inadequate salting, desalting can cause fouling in the heat exchanger tubes. Throughout the refinery, fouling restricts the flow and heat transfer and leads to failure due to increased pressure and temperature. So if your channels, like whatever channels, if it is blocked due to this salt deposition, it can significantly increase the pressure within the system, and it can cause like your system you can fail due to overpressure, or and obviously your heat transfer is not also going to be very good. So corrosion, which occurs due to the presence of hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen like hydrogen chloride, naphthenic acids, and other contaminants in crude oil, also causes equipment failure. So like since this salt, if it mixes with let's say additional like hydrochloric acid, some other salts, it is going to further aggravate the corrosion effect. Neutralized salts like ammonium chloride and sulfides, when moistened by the condensed air, can cause corrosion. So like ammonium chlorides and sulfides, if it comes in contact with condensed water, so it can also cause corrosion. So overpressure in the unit is the another potential hazard that causes failure. Overpressure, because if you are blocking the channels, so like overpressure incidents can also take place. So that is another reason. So let me just move on and show you like in some of the chemical reactions, like this magnesium and calcium chloride are pretty much sometimes mixed with your crude oil also, if this type of salts are present in the crude oil, when it comes in contact with water, what happens? It produces magnesium hydroxide. And this particular magnesium chloride to magnesium hydroxide conversion not only produces HCl, but it also produces a significant amount of heat. And as I have already told you, at increased temperature, with addition of heat, the chances of your corrosion gets further aggravated. So harmful inorganic compounds present in the crude, such as calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, sodium chloride, dissolved in water can lead to produce hydrochloric acid, which is also highly corrosive in nature. So MgCl2 plus 2H2O is going to produce MgOH whole twice plus HCl plus heat. And similarly, the similar reaction can also take place in case of this CaCl2. But this NaCl, so whatever table salt that we use, so can you tell me the difference between the reaction between MgCl2 plus water and NaCl plus water? Is there any, can anybody explain what's the difference? Basic difference, very basic.
The energy required for the magnesium process is less.
Actually, no energy is required. The process itself is an exothermic process. You add magnesium chloride, you put a magnesium chloride salt, you pour some water, heat is going to be liberated. But the opposite way it happens in case of NaCl. NaCl plus H2O reaction is basically an endothermic reaction. So you need to provide additional energy so that your NaCl get dissolved in your water. So that is why only at a higher temperature NaCl can produce your this HCl. But if it is at a lower temperature, NaCl doesn't cause too much of a problem. But obviously refinery, you are obviously dealing with above 300 degree centigrade temperatures only. So chances of corrosion from NaCl is also there. Did you understand? One reaction, MgCl to CaCl2, is an exothermic reaction. It doesn't need any additional energy. Like it can happen at even room temperature also. So you over your MgCl2 salt, you put some water, your HCl fume is going to come out, plus it is also going to be an exothermic reaction. So that is the some of the main like corrosion creating reaction. But for NaCl, the factor is that obviously it will happen at a relatively higher temperature, let's say close to 300 degrees centigrade. Now let me further move ahead. So not all water is removed from the crude oil during the first stage of gravity separation. So there are like several types of separation: gravity separation, centrifugal separation. But the most effective dehydration process, or let's say desalting process, is the electrostatic precipitation, or the electrostatic by applying electric voltage. So that is how we want to coalescence, like for example, your oil is non-polar but your water is polar, so it is going to respond to the electric voltage. So that is how you are going to create a, let's say, a larger water drop, and if the water drop volume is significantly higher, it is going to get easily separated from your crude oil mixture. So that is how this effective way of, one of the most effective way of getting rid of your water as well as salt. And within that water itself, some of the salt can also be dissolved in. So like at a one go, you can also get rid of water, you can also get rid of the salt. So not all water can be separated during the first stage of gravity separation. Crude contains water, inorganic salt, suspended solid, water soluble trace metal. Separated crude may contain up to 15% of water, which exists in a emulsified form, which is difficult for a separator to remove. So if your water and oil is present in a emulsified form, the stability increases, but the problem, obviously, it would be much more difficult for you to get rid of it. So around, if approximately 15% of water, if it is present in your crude oil, at a later stage, if you don't get rid of it at a later stage, it's going to cause severe problem in your distillation processes. So oil and water emulsion must be broken down so that this water can be removed before the crude is shipped. De-emulsification processes are accomplished by using chemical agent and heat. So let me just go, yeah, okay, just a minute. Yeah, so the purpose of desalting is to remove contaminants from the crude oil before it enters the processing unit. Although there can be other objectives, the typical objective in a desalter is to reduce the salt, solid and metal content while minimizing the oil undercarry and water carryover. Like you don't want water to remove, like while you are separating the oil, you don't want oil to be removed, but the same thing is also applicable. You also don't want water to remain within your oil. So these two consideration has to be made while actually separating water and salt from your crude oil mixture. So salt can occur naturally in all crudes, but can vary significantly between crudes depending on where you are finding that crude. A fully sweet synthetic crude that has been hydrotreated can have less than 2 ppb parts per billion, I guess. ppb is like, okay, part per 1,000 barrels. So part per 1,000 barrels, because water is actually, we measure our crude oil in terms of barrels, because that is how OPEC countries actually sell to foreign countries. Barrel is means like around 159 liters of crude oil. So that is the one of the units. So part per 1,000 barrels. So like if you are actually free of your let's say salt, so that means fully sweet synthetic crude that has been hydrotreated can have less than 2 part per 1,000 barrels. So that is actually a very ideal condition. In most of the cases this doesn't happen. So let me just move forward and talk about different types of dehydration. So this dehydration is also in conjunction with desalting process. As I have told you, you remove water, that means you are also removing the dissolved salt that is present within it. So like the first stage, it is already told that it's gravity settling, but it is not going to be able to separate the most of your water from your water oil mixture. Then you have to go for this chemical treatment. Then there is a centrifugal separation, and the last one is like using electric voltage, very high voltage. You are going to remove the water from your crude oil mixture. So that is the last one, is the electric desalter, which is the most effective process. So let me move on to this gravity settler. Yeah, salt is removed by settling or by adding chemicals or by combination of both. Salt is removed by setting or by adding chemicals or by combination of both. Crude processing emulsifying characteristics are not too responsive to the settling method. This demand de-emulsifying agent to increase the coalescence of the water drop. So like this coalescence effect is also going to come whenever we are going to deal with this electric desalting process. The crude oil feedstock is heated to 60 to 180 degrees centigrade to reduce the viscosity, the surface tension, reduce the viscosity and surface tension for easier mixing and separation of water. Sodium hydroxide, salts of fatty acid, petroleum sulfonates are such chemicals which fasten the agglomeration of water droplets. Ammonias are often used to reduce corrosion. Caustic and acid may be added to adjust the pH of the water wash. A good amount of water should be available in crude for such treatment. Lack of water demands fresh addition of water to extent of 20% is carried out. But the problem with this chemical treatment, okay, you are being able to form large, let's say large droplets of water, so it can separate from the oil. But the problem is, in order to do that, you are also adding additional water in order for your system to be pretty much effective. So you are adding sodium hydroxide, you are adding salts of fatty acid, different types of chemical to like fasten your agglomeration process. But you are also adding additional water. So so that is one of the major drawback in this chemical treatment. So like two stage of desalting is carried out with the removal of most of the water in the first stage, followed by the addition of dilution water in the second stage to extract soluble salts and metals. Process conditions varies between 90 to 150 degrees centigrade and pressure between 52 to 50 psi. When heated, the salt and other impurities dissolved and attached to the water and then held in a tank to settle down. So it's a very simple process. The first stage, obviously you separate it out because of the density. Once your like first stage is done, then you further go ahead with the second stage, where you're particularly adding your salt or whatever emulsifying like de-emulsifying agents that is there, like surfactants you can use. So after you have added that, then like when it is heated, the salt and other impurities dissolved in water. So like if your crude oil is all, I have told it has both water and salt. So at that temperature, when it is heated, so your salts are going to be dissolved in water. So by removing the water, you are removing the salt also. And obviously to aggravate the like to fasten the process, you are adding surfactants to de-emulsify. So once this process is actually over, there is I think one thing I have actually mistakenly, I guess, deleted, that is the centrifugal separation. So centrifugal separation, as the name itself suggests, just by applying the centrifugal motion, you are trying to separate out water and oil. But the problem with this centrifugal separation is, like for this purpose also, you need to add a little bit of water in order for the system to be pretty much effective. So I'll compare this all four type of separation, like chemical separation, electrical separation, gravity separation, and centrifugal separation. But before that, we should talk a little bit more on this electric desalter, which I have been emphasizing that it is the best process to get rid of oil and water. So in electric desalting process, the application of high voltage electrostatic charges are applied to concentrate the suspended water globules in the bottom of the settling tank. The potential of like voltage of around 20,000 to 30,000 volts are applied between two electrodes. Two electrons which crude is actually passed through. The water present in the form of emulsion also coalesces and agglomerates into steam, entrapping the salt within the process. The brine collects at the bottom of the desalter, because obviously water is heavy, so it is going to be present at the bottom. Brine collects at the bottom of the desalter while crude floats above and forms a separate stream. So surfactants are, in this case also, you can add a little bit surfactant to further fasten the process, but in most of the cases this is not required. So surfactants are added only when the crude has large amount of suspended solid. Only in case like it has a significantly high amount of suspended solid, then only you should be able, you can actually add additional like de-emulsifying agents such as surfactant, but in general cases it's not required. Just a moment, বলছি আমি ক্লাস নিচ্ছি, ক্লাসটা শেষ হয়ে গেলে ফোন করছি। Yeah, so in electric desalter, what are the benefits obviously compared to other systems? One is this simultaneous desalting and dehydration is taking place. Like almost like 90% removal of salt is possible. The time that is taken, like for example, for your chemical separation, be it your centrifugal separation also, the time process is like significantly higher. and compactness of the system, so it does not need a very large chamber or very large storage tank. Efficiency is higher, and also the operation is much easier. But only problem is that you have to apply a significantly high voltage, so that electricity should be available to you. So let me just compare different types of desalting operation based on their let's say based on their operating condition. So as you can see, your chemical separation process actually operates in between 60 to 90 degrees centigrade, in some cases a little higher. Gravity separation, obviously you need to increase the temperature up to 80 to 90 degrees. Same is applicable for centrifugal separation. But in addition to increasing temperature, for your electric desalting or electric separation process, temperature is not at all a factor. You don't have to increase the temperature. Now, why this temperature is such an important thing? So increase the temperature of your entire system, it requires a lot of energy. So let's say although we are using a significantly high voltage in order to separate my oil water mixture, but if you compare it in a holistic way, if you compare the energy that is required to raise the temperature up to 90 degrees, that is also a good enough of energy. But the additional advantage is that you are not adding extra water, you are not adding extra water, no extra chemicals are also in most of the cases added. Only in some cases where suspended solids are more, then you can add some surfactant. So you can pretty much understand from the operating condition itself, the temperature requirement is not there. You are not adding additional water, you are not adding additional chemical in order to separate your water from your crude oil. So that are like, if I ask what are the difference between your electric desalting process compared to your chemical separation and other type of desalting process, I think people should be able to answer it. Okay, so this API separator, this API separator is actually doesn't use, like in industry doesn't, refinery industry doesn't use it before the distillation column, but we actually use API separator in order to treat our effluent treatment. Like after all the refinery operation is done, whatever sludge, like what can I say, like your heavier petroleum fraction mixed with your water that might be present, so that can be further separated, or that oil can be further purified using this API separator. So this API separator, you can say, is a part of this effluent treatment plant. It is actually used at the back end of my petroleum refinery, not like our electric desalter. Electric desalter actually we will be using at the front end of my refinery, even before the atmospheric distillation or vacuum distillation. So this thing, I will talk about this API separator at a later stage. Let us just consider and move on to the next topic, which is the transportation of crude oil. So obviously, can anybody tell me what is the easiest way to transport my crude oil? What are the easiest way to transport my crude oil? Most effective and easiest.
Pipelines.
What? Pipelines. Because even with this marine vessels, although it is pretty much economically viable, but the problem is that during this transportation purpose, you see recently in Mauritius, right? In Mauritius, oil spill took place. Mauritius, right? Recently in Indian Ocean, one place like during the tanker movement, oil spill took place. So you have to consider that although compared to like truck or rail based oil transport, marine vessels are much more effective, much more cost effective. Also, like many countries prefer that if you don't have a direct pipeline connection between countries, so other countries may have to depend on this marine vessels only. But if you have pipeline, that is the ideal case. You don't only have to put in between some pressure boosting station, and that's it. So other than this pipeline, marine vessel, train track, let me just. Okay, so pipelines, the crude oil pipelines are the most common, safest and cheapest of all modes of crude oil and refined product transport with a upfront investment cost, and their long-term payoff comes from decades of use. Pipeline networks are built to transport crude oil from nearby oil wells to oil tankers, let's say for long distance travel. So like in USA also, I would say that pipelines are significantly contributing, but still like waterborne vessel are like the main source of main mode of transport, because US is also importing a lot of crude oil from Middle East. So from Middle East to directly send through pipeline to USA, it is not possible. For that purpose, obviously you have to depend on your let's say your marine vessels, but obviously that is also not a very safe process to go forward. So after this pipeline, this so here actually I have shown like different types of crude oil choke point, and if let's say the sea transport, if you block in this particular zones, there is going to be significant amount of petroleum price rise. So for example, you see in the Middle Eastern countries, we all most of the time we see some conflict is going on. So because of that conflict, if this let's say the 5, which is okay, so let's say in the 4 is the Suez Canal place. So if the Suez Canal route is actually blocked out, so what will happen from Middle East to your European Union, this crude oil transport is going to be severely affected. Let's say if you are blocking this pass number 2, Strait of Malacca. Strait of Malacca, if it is blocked, then from your Middle East to transporting oil to let's say Pacific countries as well as to Japan is not going to be possible. Similarly, the Mark 8 is the Panama Canal. So you can pretty much understand, obviously for most of the countries, since pipeline facilities are not there, you have to depend on this marine vessel based transport, but this is actually not a very effective way. It is also subjected to geopolitical scenario, whether let's say if you are from let's say country of USA, so USA's oil tanker may not be allowed to pass through this particular Bab Mandeb, that choke points. If it doesn't let you pass through it, then obviously you are never going to reach the sold lines, or let's say if you choke some of these points also, it is going to severely affect the crude oil price. So that is one of the points that I wanted to make. So let me just yeah. So transportation, so marine transport largely by barge or tanker is the second cheapest mode of oil shipment. This especially true for companies that export crude oil internationally. Crude tanker fleet currently contains of approximately 4,200 vessels. 85% of are owned by independent tanker companies with the sole purpose of transporting oil product from border to border. Smaller vessels typically transport clean cargoes, which are refined products which actually transport refined products such as gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and large tanker averaging 2 million barrels. Like one crude oil tanker is going to transport 2 million barrels of crude oil per movement. However, carry dirtier cargoes like crude oil and unrefined commodities. Obviously, the larger cargoes would definitely be used to transport crude oil, and this key global choke points are also shown in the chart, ranked by their daily transit volumes. From the most recent 5 years available data, the risk associated with geopolitical activity impacts the flow of crude oil through these choke points, ultimately creating a supply price pressure in the destination region. So like if you are dependent on some of this choke point, let's say I have told you like Straits of Malacca, or let's say the Panama Canal, or let's say the Suez Canal. If the Suez Canal choke point is blocked, then price in this sector, let's say in European countries, is going to go high. Same applicable for point number like choke point number 2, choke point number 8 also. So you have to live with that. Although it's the second most cheapest mode of transport, but it's a significant dependence. So the third most cheapest transport is obviously rail. Crude oil movement, but this type of railway based transportation are mostly used within the country. Like cross country, this type of facilities are not at all effective. So crude oil movement in rail spiked in 2013, but this data I'm talking with respect to USA. So increasing by a percentage of 31% from 2012. So this was due to large part due to domestic oil boom and flooded surplus oil into US market, because US are also producing a significant amount of crude oil from the shale oil, because they are using a technique I have already told you known as the fracking. So since US itself is producing a lot of crude oil, so by rail transport they can actually send their domestic oil from one part of the country to the another one. So this is this excess created insufficient pipeline capacity, open new door for railway transport as the next best alternative to move oil. That said, crude transport by rail movement have decreased since 2015. Not all oil. Okay, so you can pretty much understand the significance of this rail-based transport. So like the most unfavorable one is obviously if you can't actually move significant amount of oil, so only 200 to 250 barrel per movement, and you see using larger oil tankers, you are moving 2 million barrels per movement. So obviously in terms of size, amount, and obviously the risk of transporting oil through the roads are significantly high. So this is only the last resort that people go to. So that is how the crude oil is basically transferred from one place to the another. And from the Indian context, US context I have talked a lot. So in US context, mostly 71% of the crude oil is transported using pipeline. Rail and road consists between 3 to 4%, and coastal mainly your what can I say, your marine based transport is approximately 22. But in India, the share of this rail and road is significantly high. Coastal transport is also there, approximately around 18, and pipeline is around 52%. So that is how the entire supply chain of petroleum industry works out. So that would be all for today's class. I think I have completed the entire module 1